It's a great pleasure, and I'm very grateful for this opportunity to host this event with Jacopo Custodi, who is my good friend and colleague. We've been working together for quite some time now. Jacopo is a research fellow in political science at Scuola Normale Superiore in Florence, and he's also a professor of comparative politics at Georgetown University. Jacopo is author of the book, recently published book in Italian, Un'idea di paese, la nazione nel pensiero di sinistra, published by Castelvecchi. But even more recently, Jacopo has obviously very good publishing stamina. He just published another book in 2024 by Palgrave on radical left parties and national identity. He focused specifically on cases of Spain, Italy, and Portugal. This book comes out of his PhD thesis. I mean, one of the reasons why I thought Jacopo would be a great guest for this conversation is also because I see a lot of similarities and points of connection between my own work and his work, as I'm also very much interested in the way in left-wing strategies and electoral strategies in particular. And we both share this underlying idea that different national contexts to an extent limit or enable left-wing strategies. And in that sense, I think it's a great opportunity to share some thoughts and hear what Jacopo has to say. Jacopo will give us now a talk of around 30 minutes, and then we can continue with the discussion. I prepared a few initial comments, and then I would also like to open the floor for a general Q&A. Jacopo, thank you once again for being with us today. Although only virtually, but still, it's a great pleasure to have you. The floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. Well, first of all, really, thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure for me to be here with you, even though just online. And thank you also, Carlo, for organizing this and for your very too kind, I would say, introduction. And yeah, as you said, today I'm going to present my last book for Palgrave, which is about the radical left and how it relates to the issue of nationality, national belonging, national pride, national symbols, and all this stuff. I have a PowerPoint. I'm going to share it right now. Just a very, very preliminary comment to say I'm using the term radical left because this is like a academic label that is quite established. But sometimes when we talk also outside academia, this has another like meaning or resonance when we talk, and it seems something extremist, But in reality, when we say this expression in academia, we just imply basically everything that is on the left of the center left. So this is what today I'm going to talk about. All parties that are like in the public sphere, they are sitting to the left of the center left. Okay, let me try to share the screen. Do you see it?
Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah, that's the book, and it came out a couple of months ago. And in the book, the empirical analysis is centered on 3 cases in Southern Europe, namely Spain, Italy, and Portugal. And I will discuss them one by one, and then I will try to reason over some commonalities and differences between the 3 cases. But first of all, just to present a bit the reasoning behind the whole research. The starting point, the puzzle of the research was the fact that national identity is an issue for which there are very different stances from ideologically similar actors from the left. So you have parties that are like similar at the level of ideology. They are all part of this like radical left party family, but nonetheless, they have very different attitudes, very different stances toward their own nation, the way they relate to nationality and to national symbols. So what I wanted to understand is basically how they frame the nation. So how do they express the nation in their discourse, and why they do in very different ways, despite the fact that they are ideologically similar. So this is kind of like the premise of the research. Just very, very briefly on the methodology, I did a triangulation of 3 different methods. The first one was discourse analysis. So I was basically analyzing speeches, discourses, parties' documents, and so on from different radical left parties in these 3 countries. And in total, I analyzed 124 documents. And I conducted interviews. Most of them were elite interviews, which means that I was interviewing like politicians from those parties. But I also did a few expert interviews to people that knew the topic very well in the 3 different countries. Maybe they were journalists or academics working on this specific issue. And so a few interviews are also to experts. And finally, I did the participant observation. So I attended 18 events from different parties in these 3 countries. And, you know, this was important to go a little bit beyond just the linguistic dimension of this analysis, you know, and to also look at like the symbols, the colors, the flags, and also to have some more informal chats with the member of the parties. Even though what I was interested on was like the official discourse of those parties. So I'm not really inquiring what the simple militant think about that. I mean, of course, this I also encountered that through the years in the analysis, but this was not exactly what I was interested about. So it's more like a top-down research in this sense. That's why I did the elite interviews and not like activist interviews. And the years that I analyze are the ones from 2010 to 2020. Before entering into the empirical analysis, I wanted just to broaden this topic a little bit, because otherwise, you know, there is the risk of what is called like presentism, no? That you focus on something very present, but you don't really look back on how this issue was like framed in the past or discussed in the past. And I think this is important because the relation between the left and the nation is not something new, you know. It's something that goes back to the French Revolution and later on to the socialist movement, and it used to be a conflictual issue even in the past, you know. So it's not new, the fact that the left relate differently to this issue. And I put here a famous paragraph from the Manifesto of the Communist Party that was published by Marx and Engels in 1848. And this is the paragraph in which they talk about the nation. And it's very famous. But I want to reason with you on it, because if we actually read it, we see that there are different interpretations that can be like understood from this text. And in a way, this exemplify the fact that there were different attitudes on it later on. Like if you see the green text, this was in the green part, they say that, you know, the nation is kind of disappearing because capitalism is getting more and more transnational, globalization is taking place, and so national differences are getting less and less important, you know. And this is something in their way of thinking that has been started by the bourgeoisie, and the proletariat will just continue this process. So there is no real change in this for Marx and Engels. And this was a very common way of thinking back then, not only within the socialist movement, but also within the liberal thinkers. I mean, this is a line that Adam Smith would easily sign, you know, so there was no big disagreement on that. But, you know, right now we know that this was wrong, because after 2 centuries, we see that nations are still important in geopolitics, but also simply in our daily life, in the way they shape our cultural attitudes, our references, and so on. So they didn't vanish, despite the fact that capitalism turned global. But actually, this is something that Marx himself realized later on. So if we read writings from the late Marx, we see that he's actually well aware of the fact that nationalities are not disappearing. And he realized that, especially when he started to study more the case of Ireland, because he saw that in the industrial cities of the UK, where capitalism was more developed, and so there was a bigger working class, national antagonism between British and Irish were not disappearing, but on the contrary, they were raising, and they were putting at risk the unity of the working class. So this is the moment when Marx started to reason over those issues. But going back to the first part of this paragraph, the yellow one, the one highlighted in yellow, you see here there is a contradiction, no? Because Marx and Engels say that the working men have no country. And this is a famous line that became well known in the communist movement. But then they also add that in order to win, the proletariat, so the working class, must constitute itself the nation. So they have to turn the leading class of the nation, they have to turn the nation itself. Although they shortly add, not in the bourgeois sense of the word. And it's already everything here, because on one side they say that the proletariat has to turn into the nation, and here we can see the echo of the French Revolution, because this is exactly what happened in the French Revolution when the third estate transformed itself in the National Assembly and declared itself the nation, and that's how the French Revolution started. So you can clearly see the echo of that revolution in those words of Marx and Engels. But they also add that the nation that the proletariat must turn into does not have to be the bourgeois one. The problem here is that they don't really clarify which would be a non-proletarian, a non-bourgeois sense of the word. And one of the first Marxists after Marx and Engels that started to reason more over those issues is Otto Bauer. I put the book there, and that one is the first book. Is the first theory. It's the first Marxist theory of the nation. So it's the first time that a Marxist scholar writes a whole theory about nation, when the nation was created, how it is related to capitalism, how it will transform itself under socialism, and all this stuff. But I will not go into that, also because it's a very complex theory. But it's interesting to understand why Otto Bauer wrote that theory, because Otto Bauer was this Marxist politician from the Austro-Hungarian Empire at the turn of the century. So shortly before the First World War, and the working class there, especially in Austria, but not only there, in general in the empire, was rather strong. So the Social Democratic Party was also strong. However, the leaders of the party were very much afraid of the rising nationalisms of the different peoples of the empire, because they were afraid that those different nationalisms that were rising would put in danger the unity of the working class. And that's why they were forced to reason over those issues. There are letters of Otto Bauer in which he says that he got the very unfortunate situation in which the Social Democrats there, they were forced to discuss this issue, but they would not have liked to do so, But this also confirmed the fact that the nation was not disappearing with the expansion of capitalism, because we know now that the 19th century is also the century of nationalism, of the explosion of national sentiments, of national independence, and so on. So this just to give a very brief overview. But let's move to the contemporary cases. And the first one is the Spanish case. And, it's an interesting case because if we look at the Spanish left since late Francoism till a few years ago, we see that the Spanish radical left was completely avoiding any reference to the nation. And this is not so hard to explain, actually, because like Spain had a very long quasi-fascist regime, the regime of Francisco Franco. And Francisco Franco was extremely successful in seizing the idea of Spanish belonging, of seizing the idea of what Spanishness means, no? So over the long years of the regime, he was able to associate his own values to Spanishness, which means like monoculturalism, state centralism, and conservatism, all those values typical of the far right. And because of that, the radical left started to like distance itself from the nation, up to the point that they were even refusing the name itself of the country. They were not calling Spain it anymore, but they were calling it Spanish state, as a way to get any possible distance from the Spanish identity. There was also another reason, though. The fact that during Francoism, the independentist movements in the different Spanish nations arose. Catalonia, the Basque Country, Galicia, and so on. And those movements were anti-Spain, but also anti-Franco. And so in a sense, the Spanish radical left that was anti-Franco started to interiorize some elements of the discourse of those peripheral nationalisms in Catalonia, in the Basque Country, and so on. And as a consequence of that, as I said, they were completely like refusing any type of symbol. They were like refusing the flag, they were refusing the name, and so on. And this was very common within the whole radical left, with only very small exceptions that are not really relevant. But something changed. Something changed with Podemos. So Podemos is this new left populist party that arose in Spain in 2014. And, they tried since the very beginning to present themselves as different to the old radical left, even though they were coming from there. Like virtually all the leaders of Podemos were coming from the milieu of the Spanish radical left. However, they try to distance themselves and propose a different political project. And in doing so, they also reclaimed Spanish identity. And I will discuss a bit more why, but I want to show you just two small videos from Pablo Iglesias, the leader of Podemos. The first video is from 2013, so 1 year before founding Podemos. And as I said, Pablo Iglesias was coming from the radical left, so he was refusing Spanish identity. So in the first video, he's saying that he doesn't want to have anything to do with Spain. And in the second video, which is after the creation of Podemos from 2016, is doing this speech in front of a large crowd for the national election. And you can see by yourself the difference.
Pero yo no puedo decir España. Yo no puedo decir España.
So this is the first video from 2013. And this is the second one.
Estáis escribiendo la historia de España. Y hoy quiero pronunciar esa palabra, España, y decir que estoy orgulloso de esa España que inventó la palabra liberal, orgulloso de esa España que expulsó a las tropas de Napoleón, orgulloso de los militares progresistas como Riego y como Torrijos, orgulloso de los liberales y demócratas españoles de la gloriosa, orgulloso de Joaquín Costa y de la institución libre de enseñanza, orgulloso de esa clase obrera que defendió los derechos sociales y el sufragio, orgulloso de esas mujeres que parió nuestra patria, como la Nelken, como Dolores, como Monseni, como Victoria Ken, son nuestras madres, son nuestra matria y estamos orgullosos. orgulloso de esa España de poetas e intelectuales como Rafael Alberti, como Antonio Machado, como Miguel Hernández, orgulloso de los mineros asturianos, orgulloso de esa España que fue el rompeolas de la solidaridad internacional y de ese pueblo español que resistió como ningún pueblo de Europa al horror y al fascismo. Estamos orgullosos de esa España. Por eso hoy decimos patria, orden, ley, instituciones, frente a los antisistema, frente a los que han fracasado, frente a los responsables de la crisis, frente a los responsables de que haya compatriotas que no puedan llegar a fin de mes ni llenar la nevera.
Okay, as you could see, I mean, this is something very different, no, than from what we are used to hear from left-wing parties. No, at the end, he's even claiming that they are the one that represent patria, order, law, institution. This sounds a little bit as like a right-wing discourse. And it did seem so even more in Spain, exactly because of what I said before, exactly because of the fact that the Spanish radical left was avoiding any type of relation with Spanish identity. So why Podemos did so? There are different reasons, of course, but they mostly have to do with strategy, with party agency. So there are a few contextual, though. One contextual reason is the fact that Spain had a huge social movement in 2011, the 15M, the Indignados movement. And that movement that was against corruption, for real democracy, against austerity, and so on, had a huge impact on Spanish society. So it was a relevant social movement. And it also had an impact on the Spanish left, because in a sense, gave the possibility to the left to renew its symbolic repertoire, its vocabulary, its cultural references, and so on. And that's why, especially at the beginning, Podemos references a lot to the Indignados movement, trying to use their words, their symbols, and so on. So using the 15M, the 2011 social movement, as a way to renew the left, no? Then another reason was the experience of Latin America, because many leaders of Podemos studied or worked in Latin America. So they knew the Latin American context there, and they knew the Latin American left, which back then was in its heydays, no? So it was growing, it was strong, it was ruling almost in all the countries of Latin America. And what the Podemos leader said is that from the Latin American left, they learned that the National Popular was a much more effective vehicle to transmit left-wing values compared to the traditional European communist symbolic imaginary, no? And you see it also from the name, no? They use purple, they don't use red. There is no any communist reference there, no? So they learned from Latin America to use the National Popular as a tool to put forward the left-wing values. And this was also part of what has been called the populist strategy, no? Podemos was a left-wing party, but was also a populist party in the sense that they were trying to appeal to the people, that they were trying to use popular symbols, that they were trying to create like a dichotomic opposition between the people and the elite, and so on. And in doing so, when you do a populist strategy, it's difficult to not include also a national dimension, because when we think about the people, the way we tend to think about it as the people nation, no? It's very difficult to think about the people in a way that is completely detached from the nation, especially when you are like competing in a national context. And finally, the last element I want to say here is a secret survey that they did. So basically 1 year before founding the party, well, a few months before founding the party, they already knew they wanted to create this party, but they were still discussing on which on which strategy they should build the party, no? What exactly should be the narrative of the party. And so they conducted a private, private in the sense that it was not aimed to be published, a private survey, very professional, very big survey, in which they interviewed people, and they were doing many questions in order to try to understand which were the words, the issues that emerged as more important, and so more important for them in order to build a discourse, no? And among the questions, they also asked if they felt proud of being Spaniards, no? If they were, if they felt Spanish pride. And most of the respondents said yes. So they saw from that survey that the Spanish identity was relevant among the people. But the most important question was the one following it. And it was like, what are the elements that makes you proud of Spain? And, you know, the three most common answers were the victory in the World Cup. So the fact that Spain won the football World Cup. The second one was the sun, the fact that Spain has a very good weather. And the third one was people happiness, the fact that Spaniards are easygoing, you know, party-like people, happy, and so on. So those were the three most common answers that people gave when they were asked what made them proud of Spain. And it was a shock for the future leaders of Podemos, because for them, Spain was Francoism. And that was the moment in which they realized that they got it wrong, in the sense that their understanding of Spain was not the one shared by the normal people, you know? That was the moment in which they saw that the left did not have the same common sense on this issue than the other people. And that's why they realized that they had to change something. So they had to start to use Spanish identity. But the fact that the answers were so unpolitical made them also think that it would be possible to resignify them, no? Because Spanish identity was important, but was also non-political. So they could link it to left-wing values. And that's what they tried to do in their political strategy. So they were saying that they are proud of Spain because of the welfare state, because of the fact that there are not xenophobic backlash in front of migrant flows, and all this stuff, you know, all those left-wing values. And on the contrary, they were accusing the right of being enemy of the fatherland because they were privatizing, because they were like allowing capitalists to move companies abroad in order to not pay taxes, because they were corrupted, and so on. So it was a very confrontational patriotism as a strategy to attack the adversary. And I mean, in the research, I also analyzed the other parties, but I mean, in a sense, they kind of like were forced to follow a little bit Podemos. And also, I don't want to go too much in depth now because I want to focus also on the three cases. Otherwise, we don't have enough time. So the second empirical case is the Italian radical left. And, you know, if we simplify it a bit, we might say that the trajectory is the very opposite than the Spanish one. Because historically speaking, the Italian left was very much at ease with Italianness, with national belonging. So there is a long tradition in Italy of left-wing patriotism, starting from the national hero, Giuseppe Garibaldi, who was also a leftist, who was also a supporter of the First International. But nonetheless, he was also an Italian patriot. So since the very beginning in Italy, there was this connection. And it's a connection that emerged also in the anti-fascist struggle, because the partisans were accusing the fascists of being enemy of the fatherland, traitor of the fatherland. And also they were organized, the communist partisan in the mountains, they were like the Garibaldi brigade. So you can see like the connection with a national imaginary. And in the cities, they were the patriotic groups of the Gruppi di azione patriottica, the group of patriotic action. So they were using patriotism as a way to define themselves. And this is something that continued also after the Second World War. The Italian Communist Party, I mean, it was not expressing a bold patriotism because it was not the time anymore, in a sense, no? So the nationality was not so much conflictual in the years after the Second World War. But nonetheless, it was a strong element of their identity. They had the Italian flag in the symbol of the Communist Party. They had like the national hymn as an official hymn of the Communist Party. So in all the rallies of the party, the International, the song, had to be played together with the national hymn, which was considered as an official symbol, and so on. So there was no distance from Italianness, from Italian identity. However, over the years, the radical left starting to like gradually distance from the nationality more and more, up to the point that nowadays, except for minor groups, they completely refuse any connection with Italian identities. And also here, the reasons are many, as always, but I would say that the most important one is the fact that the right was extremely successful in hegemonizing this identity in the last 30 years. So I guess you all know Silvio Berlusconi, this very famous Italian right-wing populist leader. So when he entered into politics in the early 90s, he did so with a party which was called Forza Italia. So long life Italy, strength Italy, no? And the party flag was the Italian flag. And he was going like full into using Italian identity. All the Italian identity was used as a party identity. So in a way, it was like seizing this identity. And in doing so, it was also changing its meaning. Because before Berlusconi, for example, the partisan struggle was a very important element of the Italian identity. I don't know if you know the song L'Italiano from Totò Cutugno. It's this very famous Italian song from the 80s in which the singer talks about all the stereotypes that define Italianness, no? And some of them are the classic ones, like the fact that we cook pasta al dente, you know, and stuff like that, pizza and so on. And then you also say that Italianness is having a partisan as a president, no? So that element is important for the Italian identity up until the 80s. But when Berlusconi starts his operation, his political project, this disappears. Italianness, Italian pride in his discourse is linked to anti-communism, to freedom of enterprise, to privatization, to this idea of economic freedom, no? To neoliberalism at the very end. However, he was not using this term, of course. So Berlusconi started this process of resignification of Italian identity. And this was something that Matteo Salvini, the Lega, did and continued and even radicalized more, because what Matteo Salvini did was like to associate Italian pride and Italianness to hostility towards migrants, to the idea of protecting our culture against the external threat, to closing borders, no, against the migration flows. So it was even more resignifying it in a xenophobic direction. And this was something that was even more continued by Giorgia Meloni, the current prime minister of Italy, no? In which, if we listen to her in her discourse, Italianness is very much present in the discourse. It's all about protecting the nation, but it's about protecting the nation against migrants, against external threats, against cultural cosmopolitanism and all this stuff, no? It's not about the anti-fascist struggle. It's not about the welfare state. It's not about any issues that were common before, no? this is very different than what it used to be Italianness in the past. Because if we think about Giuseppe Garibaldi, I mentioned him before, on one side, he was an Italian hero, a committed patriot, but on the other side, he was an internationalist, no? Not only because he supported the international, but also because he fought in Latin America, he fought in France, he fought in many different wars in which he believed that he was fighting for freedom of all countries, of all peoples. So this idea of like merging national belonging with internationalism was very strong, and this completely disappeared. And this shows you how nationality at the very end is something rather empty, no? Because it can be articulated in different ways. Of course, this is not something that you can do in a totally free way, because it depends on the context, on the possibilities that you have. But the meanings of national belonging change over time and change a lot. The last case is Portugal in my research. And again, here we have a case that is different both from Spain and from Italy. Because the exceptionality of Portugal is the fact that they had a revolution. They had a revolution in 1974, and this was a military-led revolution. So the militaries did the revolution. It started as a military coup d'etat, but it turned into revolution because of the mass mobilization that supported the military. And it's also started as a left-wing revolution because the militaries that did the coup d'etat were left-wing. Most of them were even communists. And of course, this is something that didn't happen in Italy or in Spain. And because of that, the revolution was much more profound in its capacity of changing the meanings of what Portugal identity meant. Because, you know, before the revolution, there was the Salazarist regime, which was a far-right, extremely conservative and reactionary regime, but also nationalist. So, of course, during that regime, Portuguese identity was linked to far-right values. But the revolution, since it was a revolution, exactly because it was a revolution, was able to change the meanings of that identity much more than the transition in Spain and the transition in Italy. And so it was easy after the revolution for the left to claim Portuguese pride and to do so through the lens of the revolution. In a sense, the revolution emerged as a strong element of Portuguese identity itself, no? If we read the Portuguese constitution, even now, they never changed that. Even now, at the very beginning of the constitution, it's written that Portugal is a country leading towards socialism. And, you know, it seems funny right now because, of course, Portugal is not a country moving towards socialism, but it used to be in 1974 when the country democratized. And it's still present in the constitution, this line. And you already see that in a context like this, it's easier for the left to claim a certain level, at least, of national pride, of national belonging. And this is very strong in the Communist Party, because the Communist Party is the one within the radical left milieu that is like very, very much tied to the revolution. They always talk about the revolution. And I put here the party slogan, which is like Politica Patriottica e d'Esquerda, which means patriotic and leftist politics. This is the slogan of the Communist Party. And you see, patriotism comes even before leftism in their party slogan. They always use the national flag. They always use the national colors. They always talk about protecting national sovereignty, protecting the nation, and so on. But of course, this is not protecting the nation from migrants, but it's protecting the nation from transnational corporations. And so in this sense, there is a strong dimension of patriotism. However, there is already a difference here compared to Podemos, because the patriotism of Podemos is very confrontational. It's very like discursive. It's not very present at the symbolic level, no? However, for the Communist Party, it's the very opposite. they don't use it so much as a political tool to attack the adversary, but they use it as a party culture identity. It's really present at the very level of party identity. If you go to an event there, you see the national culture that emerges within a rally of the party in terms of symbols, but in terms of cultural references and so on. This is something that you don't see in a Podemos rally, because Podemos leaders decided to use this patriotism as a discursive tool. But, because of Francoism, they had nothing to do with Spanish identity anymore. So they didn't use the flag, they didn't refer to national culture, and so on. So it was very much at the discursive level. However, for the Communist Party in Portugal, it's more like at a lower level, at an identity level. And the other relevant party within the radical left in Portugal is the Left Bloc. And, the Left Bloc is a more modern party compared to the communist one. So they are more like a new left party. They are more like interested also in new issues like environmentalism, feminism, and those issues that, emerged in the 70s and so on. So they also have like a stronger support in the urban areas among students, among educated people, and so on. And so in this type of party, you don't see this old style patriotism that you see among the communists, So they are more cosmopolitan in this sense. However, you still see the legacy of the revolution in the fact that the Left Bloc has no problem with nationality. They always talk about Portugal, about the country. They don't do it in this old-fashioned style as the communists, but they still do it. So, for example, when they present a policy proposal, the policy proposal is always for the country. It's always a policy proposal for Portugal. And this is something that you don't see in Italy. When the radical left present a policy proposal, it's always for workers, for migrants, for the LGBT community, you name it, but for specific targets. It's never a project for Italy. In the case of the Left Bloc, it's always a project for Portugal, for the country. The word country is very common in their discourse. And so you see the fact that even if they don't express like a bold patriotism, national belonging is still very present, even in a new left party as the Left Bloc. So this was the last case. Just very, very briefly, I know I'm running out of time, just to focus briefly on some differences between these three countries. So a key element that emerged here is the different transition to democracy. Because, as I said, in Portugal, it was through a revolution, a left-wing revolution, and this creating a context that facilitated a relation between the left and the nation. The opposite case is Spain here, because the transition was elite-driven. It was a transition that was an agreement between a part of the Francoist regime and the democratic opposition. So it was a gradual transition that was not able to resignify so much the meanings of Spain, and so created a situation that was very difficult for the left until Podemos tried to change it, but through agency. It was not a contextual change, it was an agency-based change. And Italy here is somewhere in between, because we did have a transition that was more radical than the Spanish one, of course, but not as radical as the Portuguese one, because it was not a revolution. And also we have to consider the time here, because the Italian one was in 1945. So it's older, and the legacy, disappeared through time, because many other elements started to play a role as the radical right through Berlusconi, Salvini, and Meloni, as I said. Another element is the protest of 2011. I already mentioned that in the case of Spain. The 2011 protests in Spain were huge, and so allowed the left to renew itself. They provided new symbolic references. This was not the case in Italy at all, because the 2011 protests in Italy were weak and unsuccessful. So it did not provide an opportunity for the left to renew its symbolic imaginary and its linguistic and rhetoric strategy. And then, I mean, in Portugal, the protests were strong, but the left was already strong, so it was not a real change for the left. In fact, it was kind of the opposite. The 2011 protests were influenced by the left and not the other way around. Then we have the hegemony of the nationalist right. So the fact that a very strong far right is present in the country, of course, impact this relationship, no? And this emerged clearly in Italy. The Portuguese case is the very opposite, because until very recently, there was no radical right party in the country. The first time that the radical right party entered into parliament was 2019, and it did so with 1%. They elected one MP. And it was already a shock in the country, because there was this strong anti-fascist consensus after the revolution. So it was already a shock. Right now, the far right in Portugal is strong. So my discussion is already changing, but I did not analyze it in my research, which finished in 2020. And something similar happened in Spain, in a sense, because when Podemos emerged, there was no far-right party in the country, but then later on it came with Vox. And it also came in the moment in which Podemos stopped to use patriotism as a strategy. And because of that, there were also many discussions within the Spanish left whether that strategy was good or not. Because, you know, some people said, you see, as long as we used the patriotic strategy, we blocked the way to the far right, no? Because the far right entered into the political scene in the same moment in which Podemos dropped this strategy. But someone else said, this is not the case. Actually, we opened the way to them because we started to use those identities, those national identities, those national symbols, those national signifiers, that the right will always be stronger and more capable of using them. So in a sense, we open the road to the far right. Of course, I'm just telling here the two stories, but it's open to debate. Then the populist strategy also plays a role, and we said that before. In Spain, they decided to play the populist strategy, and this made them more aware of the need to use national symbols. This was not the case in Italy. We had no left populist, radical left party in Italy. So the populist strategy was never tried within the left in Italy. And finally, and here I close, Euroscepticism. Euroscepticism is an interesting point here, because according to the literature, there is this idea that the left get closer to the nation and to nationalism when it adopts Euroscepticism. So the literature before my research claimed that there is a strong connection between nationalism and Euroscepticism, even within the left. And what I found is that things are more complex, actually. Sometimes it's true, sometimes it's not. It is true in the case of Portugal, for example, because we see that in the moment in which Euroscepticism peaked in the country, the moment in which Euroscepticism was stronger in the country, the left increased its patriotism. And we see that within the Communist Party a lot, but even within the left bloc. The moment in which the hostility towards Europe was the strongest, even the left bloc was using a lot the national card. They were accusing Germany, they were claiming that Portugal had been treated as a colony, and we had to restore the honor of Portugal and so on. So in the Portuguese case, this link between national pride and Euroscepticism proved to be true. But for example, it did not prove to be true in Italy. Because in Italy, we also saw a growth of Euroscepticism within the radical left, especially in some specific years, you know, the years in which the anti-austerity movement was the strongest. But it did not go hand in hand with with the emergence of national pride. So those movements from the left that were against Europe, like Eurostop, for example, were not articulated Italian identity at all. They were talking about like a Euro-Mediterranean alliance and stuff like that, but they were not talking about national sovereignty. They were not talking about restoring national identity or any of that. So in the case of Italy, Euroscepticism proved to not be a driver for nationalism within the left. Okay, here I just put the different results. You know, this table is rather impossible to be read, but just to show you that the point here is not just reclaiming or rejecting the nation. It's not just yes or no. The question, the answer is more complex. There are different variables and different elements that emerge. It's not just about being patriot or not being patriot. And I hope I was able to show that through the analysis of the different cases. And here, just to finish, I swear I finish here, I just put a typology of different types that emerged in the analysis. And I want to be clear here, those are not types of radical left parties. Those are types of the way radical left parties relate to the nation. And we see like 4 different types that emerged. Social patriotism is the one that emerged in the Communist Party, and it's the one that is similar to the patriotism of the communist parties of the last century. No, this was something very common in the Italian Communist Party, in the Spanish Communist Party, in the Portuguese, and in many different communist parties in Europe, but like 50, 60, 70 years ago, even 80s. And it's the patriotism that combines worker-centered socialist elements with national elements, no? In which the interest of the nation and the interest of the workers are viewed as aligned. Then I single out counter-hegemonic patriotism that it's the one about Podemos that I talked before. It's a patriotism that emerged only at the discursive level, only at the strategic level. It's not really about the cultural level of the party. Then we have national cosmopolitanism, that is the one of the left bloc, because on one side they are cosmopolitan in their party culture, but on the other side, the idea of representing the country, of doing what is best for the country is very much important and is very much present. And finally, we have post-national cosmopolitanism, which is the case that emerged more clearly in Italy, and especially within the Communist Refondation Party, that it even renamed itself in Communist Refondation Party European Left, as a way to show that we are really talking about something beyond the country here, no? It's not just about being cosmopolitan, but it's also about as not seeing the country as like the key battlesphere here, but looking beyond that. And that's why they don't talk about doing something for the country, because this is not the reference here. And okay, that's really all. I'm really sorry if I went beyond my time, and I hope you were able to follow till the end. Thank you very much for your attention, and looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Jacopo. This was really excellent. I enjoy how you're always able to reduce the complexity of these very in-depth case studies that you undertook during your PhD into this kind of very nice narratives. I will start with a few opening remarks, but I'll keep them very brief because we have around half an hour at our disposal. So I would also like to, open up the discussion for all other participants to, maybe hear if there are any additional questions. First, I would refer to one of the moments when you were speaking about Podemos. You mentioned how the leadership of Podemos at one point strategically learned, that they undertook some kind of strategic learning process happened. And I find this kind of dynamic very interesting from the perspective of social movement theory. Actually, I wanted to ask you, what is the role of leaders in this kind of collective actors that can be social movements, political parties, in convincing the rank and file membership and in general, sympathizers, that it is worthwhile to change the strategic course so dramatically, because we can see it's a very big change between, in a matter of only a few years. What kind of conflicts did they have to manage, and how, especially given that you had also insight in interviews with party elites, what kind of obstacles did they meet in, changing the strategic course? Was there a lot of protest within the collective actor itself? I'm not speaking only about Podemos. I'm sure a similar kind of observation can be related also to a Portuguese context. The second point relates to the issue of various kinds of subnational identity that are present in both Italy and Spain. And this can go from, some kind of very banal campanilismo in Italy on a very local level to autonomism and secessionism, such as in the Catalan context. How does this relate to your story about the importance of national identity? And were there any efforts from Podemos, but also maybe this can also be related to some Italian left-wing actors, to somehow address this kind of subnational identities, or identities that are not related to the nation state, and somehow include them in the party platform? And then the last point that I would like to make, maybe this is just a general remark, but I see a lot of a lot of important relationships between what you were saying about the cases that you looked at and the cases that I looked at during my PhD. Because, for instance, I would say that left-wing actors in Southeast Europe are way more tactical and avoidant when it comes to utilizing national identity. And it feels sometimes that as if there is some kind of consensus among left-wing actors that, national identity is best left to right-wing actors. Especially because in countries such as Croatia and Serbia, you also have a very recent legacy of war, problems of state building, problems of positioning to various, groups that are symbolically powerful, that are related to war, such as war veterans in Croatia. So it feels as if left-wing actors here are relatively, they are positioning themselves, but they are somehow avoiding, I would say, this is my overall impression, avoiding a direct conflict with right-wing actors when it comes to national issues, or what we could also call, from the perspective of this kind of political, mainstream political science, avoiding sociocultural cleavage in order to actually mobilize people around socioeconomic issues. Would you say this kind of discussion about relative importance of different cleavages was also present when it comes to the cases that you looked at? And I'll stop here. If you prefer, Jacopo, maybe we can continue with questions for now, or you prefer responding right now, or you prefer taking a few more questions?
If someone has a question, I mean,
Yeah.
I'll be happy to listen.
Great. Maybe we can then collect if someone else has anything to, or maybe no. I mean, we have enough time. Maybe it's okay if you just respond, and then during your response, if somebody comes up with another question, maybe we take more.
Okay. Let me just turn on the light, because in the meantime it started to rain, so the light dropped in the room.
Sure. Go ahead.
Okay, sorry.
Excellent.
Well, good points, Carlo, and also difficult one because they are like substantial issues. Regarding the leaders, in the case of Podemos, this is central. It's basically everything here. Like Podemos, since the very beginning, they had this narrative of presenting themselves as the party very much linked to the Indignados movement as a party movement even. But that's a total lie, you know, this is just strategy. But the party was designed in a room by professors, and there was no democracy inside it. I mean, it was, as they claim it, an electoral war machine. But if you have an electoral war machine, it needs to be vertical, rigid, and you know, it was not a social movement party in this sense. Then it could be considered as such in the sense that it related a lot to social movement, but it did not come out of it, you know. And so the strategy was really decided by a very small number of people. We are talking about 5 to 10, you know. And but at the beginning, this was not perceived as a problem by the base of the party, and even by the middle ground cadres of the party, because the party was growing a lot. It was successful. And you know, when you are in a political party, in a political project that is extremely successful and it keeps growing, then it doesn't really matter about internal democracy and about all those stuff, you know. So there were no disagreement at the very beginning. There were no problem with the leadership, with the strong leadership. The problem emerged that in the moment in which the party started to lose votes, when the strategy started to not work anymore. And this is also, in my opinion, the reason why the party eventually collapsed. Now it's not a relevant party anymore. It's about 1 or 2%, you know, and it's a completely different party right now, Podemos. But I think this is connecting with the leadership problem, because they did not have the instrument, the internal tools within the party to survive any type of problem that they would face, you know. So as soon as there were problems, the leadership divided itself. There were many splits from the left and from the right. And the electoral war machine, as it was designed, it was just not effective anymore to continue in a different context, in a context of maintaining party stability and not like entering into the political space. No, it was a different context, but the party was not designed for that different context. And regarding the subnational identities, you know, this is something that Portugal doesn't have. It's the only case here that doesn't have. And it's one of its fortune in this, because, you know, Portugal has been the very same country for 500 years. There are no internal minorities, national-wise, of course, within the country. The language is the same from the north to the south. So the Portuguese identity is not conflictual on those dimensions that it is conflictual in Italy and Spain. And this is also not a reason that I did not mention before, but this is also not a reason that allowed the left to be more at ease with Portuguese identity, because there is no a strong conflictual in this sense, in this geographical, linguistic, cultural level, no. And however, there is in Italy and in Spain, but in Italy, actually, there used to be more on the right than on the left. We tend to forget this now. But the ones that did not want Italian identity in name of local identity were people from the right, the Lega Nord. They were a right-wing party. And they were claiming that the only use of the Italian flag was to cleaning their ass. That's the famous phrase of Lega Nord. And even in the World Cup, they were not like siding with Italy. They were like completely anti-Italy. And you know, this is the very same party of Matteo Salvini, the far-right Italian nationalist leader. So there was a total change of the Lega. I mean, there are many reasons, and I think we go a little bit beyond this discussion, but I think this is just another example of how identities are never fixed and possible to be exploited and to be changed. And you know, I'm coming from the north, from a small village in the mountain in the north of Italy, and there the Lega was very strong. and people were against Italy. And I still remember when Lega North leaders were coming, people from the center left that were against them, as a way of protesting, were waving the Italian flag as a way to attack the right, you know. But this was 20 years ago, but seems like a century ago. It completely changed. Now the very same people from the right that used to be from the Lega are waving the Italian flag. I think this also tells us a lot about how weak are those identities, how they change even faster if there is an agent that has enough hegemonic strength to modify the values, no? And just to go to the very last point, the socio-cultural and socio-economic cleavages, I mean, this is a very difficult topic. The attempt Podemos did, for example, was to avoid the socio-cultural cleavages because they were mostly focusing on socio-economic issues. They were basically talking about austerity, salaries and stuff like that, and corruption. Okay, corruption was the only one not strictly related to the economy, but still they were not talking about cultural issues. They were using patriotism, but to frame those economic issues. So they were always talking about Spain framed in terms of the welfare state, in terms of social policies, of helping the poor, and so on, you know, and I think this also tells us a lot about the fact that those cleavages in reality are not really so divided as we used to think, no? They tend to intertwine, or at least they can intertwine if we do so through a specific narrative. And this is something that we saw, for example, also in Portugal. I would say that when a party starts to be successful and electorally strong, in a sense, it is forced to intertwine these different dimensions. When they don't do it, usually it's because they are very weak, and so they can have a discourse that even if it doesn't resonate in the electorate, it's still their discourse, you know. Yeah, we'll stop here.
Thank you. We have a question from Sanya.
Thank you very much, Jacopo. It's very good presentation, and first I need to go with the disclaimer. So I'm coming from the philosophy and especially semiotics, and what my angle will be from that resignification of sedimented meaning part of the thing. So that's one element on resignification. Then the other element, Karlo actually put in action, and I would more or less make it as intentionality part. What are the intentions of those who are running parties, leaders, the party body, how to move on and to to reach the victory that they're heading to. And the third element will be on the side of political emotions. So these like triangle that I wish to ask you about is actually very much interconnected, or there is an internal circle on these three extremes through a dyad thinking local or global, which is now avoiding all that you used on the side of nationalist identities, etc., etc. I'm not, identity is not my word in this sense, because what I want to ask you about is the source of creating the meaning of a political emotion, how it raises as such. Like Berlusconi is the perfect example how to reappropriate the meaning, use it, and then push it into direction intentionally is made to be used. And I hope you follow me here, because it's extremely important what you did. And this is only first part of my interest or my curiosity in you developing that triangulation between, in methodologically speaking, between the desk analysis and the expertise or expert interviews and the rest of your analysis. So here, intentionality of those who are in parties, how it moves through creating specific political emotions, and on that move, on that side, how they they change the signification, or as you said, that sedimented meaning, how they change it, how it's like the wolf changing the, that's extremely interesting. It's the whole 20th century. You just go through that and you can have great examples, especially from the starting in Germany, starting between the two big great wars, you see? So left, right, it's operational thing. What does it mean, left and right, if the sediment is much complex? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, good point, totally. The resignification of sedimented meanings, this is exactly the political strategy that Podemos tried. And, if we stay to the level of strategy now in our discussion, this is a very complex and also risky strategy, I would say. It will be very effective, but it has some limits. First of all, it requires lots of time and lots of strength. So you need to be hegemonic in order to resignify some sedimented meanings, no? Because if everyone considers the Italian flag as fascist, and I just go on the street and I claim I'm a communist and I wear the Italian flag, people just laugh at me. There is no resignification there because I don't have hegemonic strength. And this also shows why, for example, Francisco Franco in Spain or Silvio Berlusconi in Italy were successful in resignifying this. Francisco Franco ruled almost 40 years in a dictatorship. And of course, in this condition, you can resignify sedimented meanings. Berlusconi owned 5 out of the 6 national televisions. And if you control 5 out of the 6 national television, it's easy to resignify meanings, So Podemos, in a sense, was still capable of doing this because it was electorally very strong. And this allowed some level of resignification, but of course not at the same strength of Silvio Berlusconi or of Francisco Franco. So there is this problem of hegemonic strength in this strategy, because if you don't have it enough, it's not just that you risk to be funny, as if I go down with the Italian flag claiming I'm a communist, but there is also the risk to backfire, because you are just spreading words and terms that you cannot control. No? If you just use those signifiers, but you are not able to resignify them, then you just spread them even more, maintaining the sedimented meanings. So I would say it's a potentially very effective strategy, but it's also a risky strategy. It has to be used with some consciousness, I would say. And here, emotions that you were mentioning play a strong role, because in order to resignify something, you need emotion. Emotion are a strong trigger for resignification. And this is something that Pablo Iglesias, for example, in Podemos, was very, very, very well aware of. So when they were talking about Spain, they were always using emotional terms. In my analysis, I also did some quantitative text analysis to see which were the adjectives that Podemos leaders were using the most when they were using national signifiers. And the adjectives that emerge are always related to emotion. The most common one is pride. It's always about being proud of the welfare state. So long life Spain, you know. It's always about using emotion as a vehicle for resignifying, because if you resignify without emotion, it doesn't work. And they were well aware of that. There is this funny phrase that once Iglesias said to someone that was asking him about this strategy, and he was asking him, but why you just don't go for like constitutional patriotism? You know, why you have this whole kind of populistic way of talking? Just talk nicely about Spain in a constitutional way. That's constitutional patriotism. And Iglesias said, you know, constitutional patriotism is not sexy. That's the problem. It doesn't work at the emotional level. That's at least what he replied, you know. That's why they needed a populist patriotism and not a constitutional patriotism, because for resignification, you needed an emotional dimension.
Yes, thank you very much. But 2 points, exactly, again, in line with what Iglesias said about the sexy things of how to reach masses and not work on institutional settling, and then within the institution, reforming it and structuring it. This is dangerous, because this is what makes danger in social democracy in Croatia, or any form of left center, or I'm not talking about further Scandinavian countries. This is what makes right-wing parties governing institutions, and just gaining much more power, and through that, what is left for the left?
You wanted
It's
to
hard to
respond?
answer.
You wanted to respond, Jacopo?
No, let's see. I mean, I appreciate the comment, but let's see if someone else has a point on this.
Okay, I have another question that I actually wanted to ask, which is a bit more technical, but I think it's very useful for everyone to hear, also for people who will follow this on YouTube later. Regarding, I mean, given that you decided to do field work and go to Spain and Portugal, and also do interviews in Italy, how was this experience? How have you managed to actually speak to party elites, and were they open to you? Because my experience when talking to party elites in general, during PhD and after, is that increasingly, as they become more important as public actors, they increasingly treat me as a journalist. They treat me not as a person who can, you know, they kind of have this kind of ready-made talk on a number of questions, and whatever I ask, I just get this kind of, you know, I feel that I'm hitting the wall and I'm not actually getting to the substance of what happened at certain point of time. And, you know, in spite of all the preparations, all the knowledge all the desk research that I might have done before during the interview, I feel like I'm being a bit, you know, as if there is some kind of censorship also with respect to what they're saying to researchers. You have this kind of experience. What was your experience like?
Very different in the three countries, I have to say. The country where for me it was the easiest to get in touch with the politicians and to get the most out of them was Spain. For two reasons, I would say. The first reason is that most of Podemos politicians came from academia. And since I was coming from academia too, it was easier to find some maybe common connection, common friends, common contacts, because academia is kind of transnational right now. So it was easier to connect the dots from me and from some Podemos politicians through academia, and this made it easier to reach them. And the second reason is that when I did fieldwork there, Podemos did not collapse yet, so it was still a strong party, but it was already experiencing a huge internal crisis. And when everyone hate each other, it's easier to get them talk in a sense, no? Because they were more prone to talk about some like hidden facts or some backstage facts about Podemos, because they were in a strong fight with the leadership or with other parts of the leadership. So it was easier. I think that if I did that in 2014, the party would be much less penetrable. It would have been much more walled, I would say. But in 2017, 18, 19, it was not so walled anymore, exactly because of the internal crisis it was experiencing. The most difficult one for me was Portugal, because I didn't have contacts there with the political landscape. So it was tough in a sense, but I have to say that politicians were also very nice. Maybe because less people are studying Portugal, so they were less used to interact with researchers. You know, in Spain it was full of people studying Podemos. In Portugal there was basically no one, I guess, or at least very few of them. So they were also more happy to help me, even if it was difficult to get in contact with them. As soon as you did, then they were nicer, and they also provided me with contact from other politicians, so kind of snowballing, as it used to be called, you know? Yeah.
How was the experience in Italy, which is your, kind of the context that you know really well? I mean, also, I think, given that in Italy there is no such, central, or how to put it, consolidated actor in electoral sense, how was this?
I mean, on one side, it was easy also in Italy, because those radical left parties in Italy are extremely weak. So when you interview the leader of a party, he's not someone very important, you know. So it's easier to get to talk to him, no. So in this sense, it was easier to interact and to get to them. But on the other side, I found more difficulty in let them open themselves in the talk. You know, they were more distant. They were more diffident. Do you say that in English? Yeah, more diffident to talk. You know, and I think this is also connected with the fact that you are a marginal party. When you kind of end up at the border of the public political system, then you tend to be less trusty of people, to be more on the defensive. So it was easier to reach them, but not so easy to let them talk about something beyond the public speeches that they would tell to anyone else, you know.
Okay, I would just like to check if there are any additional points, comments, questions from anyone. If not, maybe this is the right moment also to close the today's session. I can thank once again Jacopo for joining us. This was an excellent presentation. I'm sure many people will find it useful later, also because it's going to be published on YouTube. I would like to thank Center for Advanced Studies of Southeast Europe, and to Tina, Irena, and Sanja, of course, for being with us today, and for enabling me to host Jacopo. Yeah, and that's it. I have nothing to add.
Let me just say once again, thank you very, very much for inviting me. Thank you, Sanja and Carlo, for your very on-point comments and questions. And thank you for staying with us till the very last moment. And once again, apologize if I used more time than I should have.
I really enjoyed it. Really enjoyed the presentation. It was really, really, really useful and informative. Also, I mean, your book is available at Routledge, but also people can contact you directly if they're interested in.
Yeah, definitely. Also,
yeah.
I'm aware it's unfortunately very expensive, but if you need it, I will be happy to send the PDF. So just drop me a line on the email.
Yeah. Great. Thanks a lot. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much to you. Bye.
Thank
Have a nice day.
Bye bye.